So, I wanted to talk to you guys about how you felt about it. There was a conversation a couple weeks ago where there were people who saying we should not be allowed to send Marines into LA to seize people. And before I continue, anyone who sees this is going to notice there's something different, and that's our friend Will is joining us for this podcast. Unfortunately, Stu couldn't make it. Um, Will, if there's anything you want to say about yourself before I continue.
Uh, Not really. I served with you guys. I was a corpsman. Um, Overly opinionated Wahhabist Christian.
Yeah, that's kind of why I wanted you on here because I know because I think you actually made a video about this subject at some point. Am I right about that, Will? About the ice
Probably.
stuff? Okay, yeah, and so I figure Will cares passionately about this subject. Let's have him as uh, a guest for this subject. So the big issue of contention, and it's why I had mentioned to Stu initially, who couldn't be here unfortunately. Um, that it's a good subject to talk about is it's this sort of fine line between what is legal and what is illegal. And um so Neal, what is your point of view? Obviously Will and I are speaking on this as former corpsmen, members of the Navy, but also very much, most of our buddies are Marines, so we care about you guys, love you guys, etc. Um, but you having been a Marine, um, what is your perspective on this idea of Marines assisting with ICE to deport people?
So I was pretty torn on this one just because being a constitutionalist, I try to leave my emotions out of it. I try to leave everything as what was the intent of the founders on this, and it's a hard one because one of the first times the Marines were ever activated was because the Barbary Pirates, and then Thomas Jefferson used the Marines specifically because he can control them without congressional control. So is that within his right? Yes, it is within his right. Is it right for him to go in and to make grunts a bunch of cops? No. I mean, he could. It would be a terrible idea. They would, be very aggressive in their ROEs going against people that are causing any type of physical violence against the ICE agents. Is it a smart idea to quickly mobilize the Marines and put them on federal property, make sure federal property is protected during said unrest? Yeah, well within his rights to do so, and I think a great idea. Um, did it escalate more than what should have been necessary? Yes. I don't like new scum. I can't stand his commie little ass. But I will say that yes, when you start bringing in National Guard and bringing Marines and bringing in MRAPs to Hollywood Boulevard and all that kind of stuff, and then no one's really clear on what the ROEs are and who's responsible for what. I mean, you're just adding more chaos to a problem. Now, if you would have said, "Hey, I deployed the Marines and they are currently on," you know, baseball stadium or football arena, whatever, and they're just hanging out there. And if they're needed, then we're going to use them. That's a different story. That's more of a preemptive kind of like, hey, before if things get out of hand, we already have things in place, to maintain peace and order or discipline. Totally understand that, but it seemed like it was a much more knee jerk reaction in just bringing a bunch of guys and Marines there from 29 stumps, and these guys were just like, cool. So I'm going to go with riot shields and I'm going to be able to headbutt a hippie and, this is going to be great, which is fine. It's what the Marines are for. But I think the delivery method and execution method was poorly made, even though it was completely done legally.
Okay, so Will, any pushback on that or extrapolation?
Yeah, I don't know about pushback. I would say I don't like the idea of the Marines being used as a police force anywhere. That's not what they do. So you're trying to use a screwdriver to bang in a nail, or a hammer to screw and screw. They're not the right tool for the job. Marines, they bring violence of action. That's what they do. So when you put them in a position to accomplish a mission, they're going to use the tools that they're trained to use, which is, let's be honest, violence, right? That said, I don't think that they were there assisting ICE. I think they were there protecting federal property. And I think Donald Trump, for all of his faults, I think he's the type of person who kind of pays attention and learns from his mistakes. And I remember watching the Chaz, watching the Chop, watching the courthouse attack, watching the president get rushed into a bunker, watching them burn down a historic church, watching them burn down Ferguson, watching them burn down cities in the summer of love, while the president did absolutely nothing about it because he was afraid to be called a tyrant. So I think what you see here is a guy who's looking at the situation, what happened before, what's about to happen now, and saying, I'm not going to let that happen again. It makes sense. Now, as far as activating troops, CONUS, I don't like it. Certainly don't. But honestly, what's the difference between your average inner city policeman and a National Guardsman? Power. They have the same weapons. They basically dress like they're about to invade. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the only difference is the police have more power, realistically.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I don't like it. I wish it didn't have to happen. But truth is, you know, when it's kind of one of those things. It depends on the lens you're looking at it through. If the Marines were called in to arrest KKK members rioting in the streets of LA, totally different set of people would be complaining about it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
But just
absolutely. Sorry, I'm trying to bring up a resource to help with the conversation.
Well, while you're doing
yeah,
that, I agree. You know, this is one of the few times where I heard Democratic Congress representatives, House reps say like, "Why are you bringing the Marines? Like Marines are for war, right?" Totally agree. We are the sledgehammer against the fly. Um, but I want to make sure I differentiate my argument here. If someone is going to do all the things like Will was talking about, where they're burning down churches, they're burning down areas, whatever, and destroying federal property, the first person I want to be there is a Marine, because it's going to be like, nope, not playing this game. It's not like a hey, National Guard. Like, well, I just do this on the weekends. Like, do I really want to deal with this? And whatever. A Marine is just going to be like, okay, so you chose violence. Now we're going to conduct violence, right? But as far as a police force, I completely disagree. And if anything, we learned that in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they tried to make Marines into cops with the villages, and it did not work out well at all.
Uh, yeah. So my point of view on this, and this is, and not to speak for Stu here. In fact, once we've done this, I'm gonna send a copy to Stu so he can, if he wants to respond, so that it started from um that conversation. But Stu was concerned about the legality because I had posted that yes, it actually is legal for Marines to be utilized the way that Trump was using them, because it was supposed to be protecting ICE from assault, protecting federal facilities, and there's like this idea that you cannot, um obviously you're not supposed to be policing or fighting your own citizens as an active duty member of the military on American soil. Fine. So there was that delineation. There, some people might say it's a gray area. Sorry, I was just looking up amendments because unfortunately, I say this as someone who's had several hours of constitutional law. I don't always remember the amendments. I apologize for that. But I think there was a Third Amendment issue. There was a Fourth Amendment issue because obviously these soldiers, Marine soldiers, troops, whatever, military, you do have to have them sleep somewhere. So there was a concern of like, oh, are they going to be staying in hotels? Boom, they showed pictures of them like sleeping wherever, right? Then there was a search and seizure It was a concern whether the Marines were going to be taking part in arrest. My understanding is they never took part in any arrests, right? So clearly, some of this is still ongoing. I'm sure there are Marines still there, but there was a big stink about it, and then suddenly it kind of just disappeared, because then people started talking about other things. And then there was also due process. It's hard to get due process by a guy who is not trained in the Constitution, but like you guys said, to bring violence, to bash some hippie heads. So I think it is this sort of tenuous area, but then I get into the argument of what if Trump or whoever had said, you know what, go in there and break some skulls, make some arrests. Is there any sort of purview where that might have been not only justified, but legal? And that's where I sort of I'm thinking about connecting the money trails, and like people who are foreigners enacting violence on federal officers and federal agents, so Neal, as far as that sort of idea, like this concept of like we are fighting a foreign enemy, is that just me blowing smoke, or do you think I have any argument there? And let me turn up your volume, get you going.
No. So yes. Um, I don't even know why this is a talking point now. Like it's some kind of surprise. We've known for decades now that Qatar, Iran, all these little different factions, a lot from Saudi Arabia, all of them have been infiltrating all sorts of facets of American life to stir up, unrest and all those kinds of things. So they're like, "Ooh, is it possible a foreign military?" Yes, the answer is always yes. It's always if you look at the Cold War. The Soviet Union was completely entrenched in American society in order to take us down from the inside out. So that absolutely.
It, and Neal, sorry, just gonna interrupt you here. What I was also talking about is just the funding,
Yeah.
foreign money, and
Yeah.
foreign agencies, um, who
Yeah.
have links to who have all links to all sort of people who, for whatever reason, want our country to fundamentally change. I'm not going to name names or ethnicities or countries or whatever. That's a different that's a different podcast for a for for a different audience, right? The uh, but yeah, like,
Yes.
all right, continue now. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's completely true. That's not a new thing. It's been going on for a while. The Chinese have been doing it for decades. This is just kind of getting a little bit more limelight than they normally do because it's a much larger organizational piece that's been taking place. I will say this though, I always like to take things back to the history. Look at the history, and so we can learn, so we don't repeat the future. If you look at the raids of John Brown on the Harper's Ferry armament back in the late 1850s, before the Civil War. Well, what did the president do then? Okay, well, they find out that this guy, over good reasons, right? He wants to end slavery in America. More, yeah, right on, right. Good reason to have that backing towards that belief structure and want to, create abolitionism within the United States. But what he does is he ends up grabbing some freed slaves, goes down to Harper's Ferry, and then takes a bunch of people captive in order to get the weapons from them out of this armory that where they manufacture firearms. And his goal is to take over the town to then get all these guns, take them over to freed slaves or to slaves, have them become like an armed militia and rise up against the slave owners. Now, we have to look at this from different facets. There's a moral objective to this, there's a political objective to this, and then there's a just downright reality focus on this, right? Morally, John Brown wanted to do something very good for human nature because obviously we even put it inside of our Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. We were not doing that. We were falling short. We needed to fix that 100%. However, we look at it from the political standpoint. Politically, completely wrong. Okay. you're rising up arms against the United States government or to federal forces, and you're doing so without any legal action whatsoever or due process whatsoever. And so, what did the president do? He sent in the Marines to go squash this thing and be like, hey, it's done, it's over. And oh, by the way, we're going to hang him after it's all said and done. Because guess what? Moral right does not equate to the fact that you're a legal right. Okay. So, we have to constantly detach ourselves in a lot of these events and say, what is the different aspects here? And a lot of times, what I see, and unfortunately, I see it more on the left than I do on the right. The left has this empathy where they go, yes, but it's morally right. But then you have the more conservative side where I'm like, yes, it might be right, but it's wrong to commit crimes, right? Like we have due process in our Constitution for a reason, right? So that's one issue, right? That's an internal insurrection, and I bring it up because it was a big talking point where they're like, hey, does the president have a right to do an insurrection act? Yes, they're organized. A lot of them, some of them are armed. They were uprising and causing large amounts of public damage. They were attacking authority figures, whether that is a local, city, county, state, or national or federal representatives. So yeah, they had every right whatsoever to go in there and do that. Now, where the tipping point really comes in, where now I would say, yeah, Trump had everything in his power to do whatever he wanted to do, to include he could have suspended habeas corpus, which he would not be the only president to do. There was three other presidents that did it in our past, and it was all for good reason. Trump had every right to suspend habeas corpus in this point. Why? Because everything I just mentioned, excuse me, everything I just mentioned. And on top of that, when you go back and like you're talking about, Rick, when you start having that foreign aid and you have these foreign influences and all this kind of stuff, like now you're not talking about a grassroots movement, right? You're talking about an internal insurgency,
Yeah.
100%, 101. So once you cross that line, sorry, buddy, like gloves are off. Like you're going to get everything there is known to mankind that's going to come towards you and against you. So that part, I see it that way.
Okay, Will?
Well, I would have to look at, the moral versus legal argument. My inclination is if it's morally wrong but legally right, it's wrong. Um, you know, and there's, we could shoulda, woulda, coulda this thing all day long with Harper's Ferry, for example. What if the Harper's Ferry revolt had been allowed to flower and they did take over the town and they actually got their point across? Would that have avoided the Civil War? Would would heads have turned in Washington and would they have said, well, this is getting serious. Maybe we should, look at this. I don't know. It didn't allow it to happen. What I will say about the current situation is the United States government's job is to protect the American people. It's not to cater to third worlders. It's not to, we are the world and kumbaya and hold hands with everybody and open the doors and let everyone in. And as far as, due process for the people who are here illegally and the people, by the way, who are protesting as legal immigrants, when you become an American citizen and you raise your hand and you swear allegiance to the United States, you swear off allegiance to all other countries, governments, kings, potentates, dictators. So if you're waving their flag, as far as I'm concerned, we'll put you in the same slingshot we used to fire the illegals back into their country. You can go too. You lied. Bye bye. It's that easy. The other side of it is, I look at, I am a Christian, and a lot of these people who are coming across the southern border are also Christians, and I do have a soft spot for them. But realistically, if a Christian breaks into my house and is sitting on my couch, and my inclination is to grab him by the scruff of his neck and toss him out the door without due process, I'm sorry, that's what's going to happen because that's what's morally right. You don't get due process when you break into my house. You get thrown the hell out if you're lucky. That's just it. So what's taking place just in general, big picture with ICE and Marine Corps involvement and Army National Guard involvement, you don't have a country unless you have borders, language, and culture. Those are the three things that make a country. If you don't have those, any one of those things, one of those three legs off the stool, you don't have a country anymore. You know, and it's not really fair to be. I think we should be taking a long look in the mirror because we we incentivize this type of behavior. We leave the front door of the house wide open and we dangle $100 bills in the open doorway, and then, oh my God, I can't believe they're all coming in. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's on purpose, right? No one's this intent. No one's this dumb. No one in government is this dumb. They know exactly what they're doing. They want votes because they want Senate seats. You know what I'm saying? That's why they fought so hard to keep you know, the the legality question off of the census. That's what this is. And you get some people out there who say it's the browning of America and that's a good thing, or it's the great replacement theory and that's a bad thing. I don't care about race. It doesn't matter to me at all. It's as important to me as eye color, hair color. You didn't earn it, so it's not really important. You were born that way, whatever. But I do think there's something to be said about, you know, if I take one family from the rural Midwest and I move them to a small Japanese village, in a couple of generations, that Midwestern white family, say, is going to become pretty much Japanese, right? They're going to adopt the customs because they have to. They're going to adopt the culture because they have to. They're going to intermarry because there's no other white people there. They're going to become Japanese in a couple of generations, full on. They may look a little different. They'll be Japanese in every sense of the word. But if I move 10,000 rural white families to that small village, what's going to happen is those white Americans are going to destroy that Japanese village. It's going to become an American village. It's going to be McDonald's and Starbucks and yoga pants and rap music and everything terrible about our culture pretty quickly. My point is, I want to see Japan stay Japanese. I think Japan is a beautiful country. It's unique. It's got a wonderful, amazing, rich, deep culture, and that should be protected. And I don't see why we shouldn't fight the same way the Japanese do to protect our culture here. I'm all for having people come in. I have no problem with that. Come on in, come in the right way, become an American, wave the flag, place your hand over your heart, sing the anthem. I have no problem with that. I don't care. But you can't come here, you know, it's like people that move from Massachusetts to New Hampshire and then they vote for Democrats when they get here. Like, what'd you move here for? You moved here because you voted the other place into a shithole. Now you're trying to escape it and you're bringing the stupidity with you. Stay there, get out.
Yeah,
That's ultimately the way I look at it.
yeah. When we had a couple houses come into our neighborhood, and both houses from California, we're like, oh, wonderful. And then come election season, they had they had "Let's Go Brandon" signs out there. I was like, oh, okay. You wanted to get away from the communism, and and
Yeah.
and to your point about Japan, I am going to tie this into sort of this theory I have. So pardon me for being a little long winded on this. Japan had a bunch of, I want to say, Kurd or Turkish
Hmm.
refugees who were allowed to come there. And I want to say it's in the vicinity of 50,000. Just 50,000 was enough to disrupt the city they went to the point where, like, now they're, I watched a video on this just earlier today, where there's like a guy, there's a Japanese politician who wears a "Make America Great Again" hat and calls himself the Japanese Donald Trump, and their entire conservative movement is like, we can't do this. And something that the government did is they said, well, we have falling birth rates. We need to import other people, right? And that was part of the policy to let people in there. And I think this is the step. These are the steps that societies take that ends up making them import third worlders. And I will not apologize for calling someone a third worlder. You guys have been to the third world. I've been to the third world. We know there's a difference in behavior, mentality, hygiene, you name it, right? So it starts with this. Let's enrich ourselves. We are at the top. Okay, so we want to hold on to our money. So who can we pay less money? We can pay this worker less money because he's from a place where they don't require as much. Society has gotten used to having a certain amount of money. We can't afford to pay them. Well, Why
Mhm.
not? Why not, instead of us losing our bottom line, I can't have my second or third vacation house. I can't have a yacht. I can't have my fifth or sixth boat. I should be allowed to have those things. So I'm going to pay this third worlder to do a job. He's not going to do the job as well as a craftsman, as someone who studied, who was, let's say, a master plumber, a master electrician, a master craftsman, anything you want to look at where you had a journeyman to master skill level, right? We're not going to hire those people. And we're going to buy cheaper products, but we are still going to make just as many profits. Then the people who are like, well, we don't want to do these jobs and we're not making any money by doing them, we're going to leave those jobs. So then you have a declining workforce. And then those same people who can't make the money they used to, they say, well, I'm not going to have kids, or I'm going to have one kid at most, or I'm going to have dogs. And then it's like, oh, there's a crisis. We don't have enough workers. And it seems like every society does this. If you look at our society, if you look at a lot of the European countries that have declining birth rates, as well as South Korea and Japan, also declining birth rates. It's always this thing where the people at the top want to bring in low wage workers and don't want to pay high wages. And it really is so tied in to the economy. And it is tied into, let's displace people who don't want to take lower wages. And it affects the entire economy. And that's that's kind of the way I see that element of it.
Mm.
And but we'll get back to my sort of ideas about what should or shouldn't be going on in California. Neil, you got anything to expand on that?
Uh, so a few things on that one. You know, Will, you brought up a really good point about. I did do a poor job on the differentiation between moral and legal right. Uh, I will say, to elaborate more on that one, my personal belief is that, being a constitutionalist, that we essentially did set up Judeo-Christian values within our laws within this nation. Therefore, a moral right and legal right is one and the same. Unfortunately, there's others out there that don't see it that way, and you could go blue in the face trying to explain that to them. So yes, I was bringing a little bit more painting with a broad brush, I guess, with the whole moral right kind of a thing. But to understand, to go against the legal values of this country is to go against the moral right of the nation, because of the values that were established in the premise of making those laws. Okay, so that's one. Two, I have a really hard time with the whole immigrant argument. Probably because I've worked with so many of them back when I was doing house construction before I joined the military. I've seen lazy ones. I've seen convicts. I've seen fantastic husbands. I've seen fantastic fathers. I've worked with ones that were so lazy that we fired them within 15 minutes of being on the job site. I've worked with other ones that they work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, never complain, always look for overtime. So I don't like it when, let's just say, the mass media groups every single one of them as if they're one person, right? They're like, oh well, they're just coming over here to make a better life. Yeah, 15 or 20% of them are coming over here to have a better life. What's the other 80% doing, right? So we can't live in la la land and think that, hey, oh, these poor immigrants, like, yeah, we are a nation of immigrants, which is why I have very little sympathy, because mine did it the right way. And I'm sure your two families did it the right way coming in as well. So it's not that I'm not empathetic. I'm not sympathetic. I might be a little empathetic, but I'm not sympathetic, because my family did it, 300 years ago coming to this country, and they did it with no money in their pocket, no politician on their side. You know what I mean? Like, everything against them. Hell, Walker's not even our original name. Our original name was Velk. Being Germans coming over here, there was so much hatred for Germans that my own family changed their name to not sound German when they came to America so they wouldn't be targeted. Okay. You want to go back and talk about being targeted as a migrant? Yeah, my family had to change its own name to live in a cabin in the middle of the Pennsylvania woods so they could have somewhat of a peaceful life. So sorry, again, you're not going to get any sympathy from me, right? Um, is there ways that we can garner to root out to figure out who should be here and should not? I think it is. I think it's real easy going in what Will was saying earlier, which is in Japan, which I lived in Japan for 3 years, and their immigration policy is damn near impossible. You have to be completely fluent in Japanese before you're even thought to possibly come into the country and become a citizen. And I don't know if you guys know this, but there's like 26,000 characters in the Japanese language, right? It's not something you just pick up and read a book and you're like, hey, I can read Japanese and speak Japanese now. It doesn't work that way, right? Um, so, with that being said, there are stipulations we can put in place to not just make sure they're not a drug dealer or a human trafficker coming into our country now bringing in that kind of crimes in their own country, but there's other things. Can you read English? You have reading comprehension, comprehension in English. um, do you understand the history of the country? Do you understand why we have the laws that we do? Just like all these little civics that we need to have and to understand, be like, hey, I love the fact that, every single year you guys have some Latin holiday that you celebrate at your house. Hey, you know what? Here at my house, I love celebrating Oktoberfest because I love to tell my kids about, their heritage of where their family came from, right? But what happens 364 days out of that year? There's a flag out in my front yard that's the stars and bars, and my kids know all American history. They know exactly the civics. They understand the importance of what it means to be a citizen and to garner the health of their nation first before their self-interest, right? Like these are just little principles that are like, hey, I get it, but we're all Americans in the end, and I don't care. There's none of this like, well, I'm going to go here, rape off the opportunity, send money back home, and this gives me an excuse to, kind of like live off of the system. Nope, sorry, man. It's an either or nothing. You're either all in or you don't come here. It's just that simple. That's what my family did. They came across with five Deutschmarks in their pocket. I know because I did the research, and it was him, his wife, and three kids with nothing. And they came in and they built literally a house by his bare hands into a German community in Pennsylvania in the early 1700s. So if he was able to do that, sorry, you might get a little empathy from me because it's modern day, but you're not going to get any sympathy. So that's something we definitely we have to stand our ground on and really hold our feet to the fire on that. Off my soapbox.
All right, Will.
Yeah. So the immigration question, big picture, I think needs to be looked at, right? Um, First and foremost, we look at immigration and we say, the right says we only want the best from around the world. Okay. And the left says we want anybody who's, let's be honest, willing to vote for us from around the world. All right. The problem with both sides is if you go with the right, you just take the best from around the world. Okay, so I'm going to take the three doctors and the one guy who can run a lathe from Uganda out of Uganda. What's that do to Uganda? I'll tell you
Yeah.
what it does to Uganda. It makes them the recipients of our tax dollars and aid because they don't have any doctors or anyone who can run a lathe, right? The other side of that is we'll import all the third worlders from around the world because who we feel bad, and we bring them into the country. Okay, well that expressly hurts us whether they're good people or not, right? Because look at it like this. Let's say you run a business, right? You run a landscaping business, and I come to you and I say, hey, I'd like to work for you and I'd like to make $20 an hour. And we're going to haggle about it. You're going to come at me with 15. I'm going to come back to you with 17. We're going to go back and forth. Now imagine a Greyhound bus pulls up out front with a whole busload of people who say, Senor, I work for $2. Now, maybe you don't hire them because you're an upstanding citizen, but you look me in the eye and go, 17? Really? By dint of them being here, it drives down the wage, right? And it's basic economics. Prices and wages go up when they can and when they must. Same thing but when they go in reverse, right? So if you created a cell phone, right? You create the skinny phone, the greatest phone ever, all right? And you want to sell it, but you want to sell it for $1 million. Who can afford to buy that phone? Nobody, right? So the price has to come down. It has to, unless, of course, the government steps in and gives out checks for $999,000, and then everyone gets it and buys the skinny phone. You, being a good businessman, go, wow, that was easy. Everyone can afford to buy my phone. So guess what can happen to the price? It can go up, so it will go up. That's what happened to college, for example. That's why no one can work their way through college anymore, because the government subsidies made it so that the prices could go up. So they did. It's the same thing with the immigration. I think it should be difficult to get here. Like the Japanese, I'm not so much concerned about it being expensive, but I think it should be difficult. I think the litmus test should be, how bad do you want to be here? How many hoops are you willing to jump through? If you're willing to do that, do it all the right way, then hey, I have no problem with you being here. I really don't. You know, that's my basic take on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna really jump on that one because you hear a lot of times in the news where they're whining to the camera like, but it takes like 3 4 years to get through the process to finally get in this country. Hey, guess what? If you really, really want to come to the United States, you're gonna do the 4 years. You're gonna do 10 years if you really, really want to get away from whatever mess that you're living in with your life. So I think I know the length process also has to do with the fact, like, trying to do a new investigation, trying to figure out the types of people they are. And I get all that, but I think it's also beautifully inherent that it also takes a certain amount of time, because that really weeds out the people that are like, well, I just wanted to go over there because I heard that I could pick cabbages for, a few dollars extra an hour. I didn't really know it's going to take me that long and that much money and that much work to actually get over there. I don't really think it's really worth me doing it. Okay, good. The system has now worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna jump in here for a little bit, because I, as far as I know, I am the only person in this conversation who has actually worked in immigration, right? And in that, uh, going back to what I had to learn whenever I was at school to become a CBP officer, right? There are so many legal avenues to work legally in this country that if you're not willing to do them, and I'm talking about specifically foreigners, if you're not willing to do them, you are either too stupid, too lazy, or disregard the laws of our land so much, I don't want you here. And I'll give an example. There's a seasonal worker program, and I specifically remember stamping passports of guys coming over on, I want to say it was the H-2A visa, and they would come in here and they would go pick crops. They would work on farms. They were unskilled labor. But the deal was is they had to go back after the season was over, and that could have been anywhere. It could have been 3 months, 6 months, or even up to a year if they sought authorization once they were already in country. As far as um, as far as that, I also saw a big problem, and that a lot of deportations, or rather the lack of deportations, was because of laziness. Um, I I take pride in the fact that it was either my last day of work or my second from last day of work. I helped deport someone. It was my referral that got him deported because I genuinely believed I was talking to a future terrorist. Right? It just something in my gut hit. Right? I you had to detect lies. Right? But what irked me is when I would process someone got a plane flying over. So was it when I would write up someone for a deportation order, and then it would come back, oh well, nah, just let them in. We'll parole them in. They'll go see the judge. And I'm thinking, like, part of the problem was also, and keep in mind, my first year at CBP, Barry Obama became president, and we had Licolotopus Napolitano become the Homeland Secretary, right? So the problem is within our own government there was just pure laziness. Uh, I would have people who they would come to the United States for 6 months admitted, then they would request another 6 months. They would fly back to India for a week and then come right back, and I would hand it to the officer, the enforcement officer. It's a special class you go to become the enforcement one, the one who issues the deportation. And they're like, nah, it's okay. And I'm like, these guys have overstayed their visa, are gaming the system. This actually by law is illegal. And the guy's like, they're not hurting anyone. They're just three Sikh. It was three Sikh guys from India. They all look exactly the same. They all had long beards, hair, gray. They were triplets, right? And I was like, I could have just deported a set of triplets, and you're taking that from me, right? So I'm I'm going to give you an example of doing it the right way for one of my closest friends. Um, my my friend Tyron, he is of Indian descent, but grew up in Saint Lucia, right? So he's Saint Lucian, but it's just like, you know, just like you don't think all black guys are from Africa just because he's an Indian dude doesn't mean he's from India. His family lived in Saint Lucia for years and years and years. He meets his future wife when she is on doing missionary stuff down in St. Lucia, falls in love. He applies for the fiance visa so he can. So before he decides he's going to become engaged, let me back up. He puts in for a B1, B2 visa. He was told by the woman who processed his visa whenever he got it, she said, we normally don't give visas to people like you. She's like, I've never seen this happen. In other words, because St. Lucia is a poor third world country, they don't usually give out visitors visas to someone his age. I think he was 19 or 20 at the time, right? So she's like, you guys don't get this. Like, I don't know how this happened, whatever. So he goes to, I want to say Indiana, where Amanda, his wife, is living, meets her, realizes this is the woman of my dreams. We need to get married. So then he wastes some time, does the fiance visa, and what do you know? They're engaged. There's proof. They're in love. She comes to visit again. And then, boom, he moves to the United States. He's an American citizen. I know very few Americans as patriotic as him. Every holiday he celebrates as if he was born and bred here, and he didn't move here until he was 20 or 21, right? And it is a tough process, right? His brother, because of his migration, he was able to do what we call chain migration. But these aren't scumbag people. These are people like his brother Ravi moved here a couple of years ago. He's already like going to become a supervisor where he works because he's such a hardworking individual. These are people who did it the right way. And when people do things the right way in anything in life, they're going to be more quality people. Ravi has lived here for 2 years without his family because he's doing it the right way. He's doing their paperwork now, looking forward to getting them here, right? So we need to amplify these people who do it the right way. Not ones like, say, Somali and Ilhan Omar who marry their brothers so they can get citizenship. But yeah, we do need to amplify people who do it the right way. And that's just sort of my little soapbox on this idea of like, just let them in. And to your point, Will, that is exactly it. I can tell you right now, I have a new house. We just moved in just over 2 weeks ago. Part of the reason we moved is because we knew this house was built in the 90s where most of the labor was legal. Who was building our house? A bunch of guys playing that old Norte music. That I don't mind the sound of it, but I know the people who listen to that, 9 times out of 10, they didn't come here legally.
Yeah, I can agree on that one, and understand that one. I've heard, I work in the trades, both in the military and out. And I think the one thing that's not garnering enough attention, not to take this conversation to a different direction, but I think Mike Rowe is not getting enough attention for what he's talking about. And we've kind of touched and hit on it a little bit as we're going through. We're already having a trade skill deficit within this country. And there's people out there that say, well, you know, we could bring in that carpenter from Guatemala and he'll work for pennies on the dollar and we need a carpenter. So, hey, look, dude, there's two wins right there. Um, yeah, but there's also no replacement for skilled labor either. And I say that as a person that hates unions. Um, there's probably going to be a lot of people out there. They're going to be like, "Have you lost your mind? That's an oxymoron." No, it's not an oxymoron. I grew up in the South where you could actually be educationally and formally trained to do a job, have a trade skill, do it correctly, and make a good living off of it. You're not going to be a millionaire, but you're definitely going to be very comfortable in your life, doing that job correctly and not be in a union where I have to vote a certain way and pay money towards them because I want to retire one day. Like, anyway, that's a different trade. Anyway, going back to it for Mike Rowe, I think that is a conversation that should be intertwined with what we're talking about with immigration. Um, can't do they come here and do the hard labor for cheap? Yeah. Guess what? I grew up on a farm, and 99% of our workforce was all Mexicans because I was picking oranges all day, or taking care of poultry, cages and out of the farm. Got it right. Um, can you do that legally and still do that job? Yeah, you can. Because they're all like, oh well, but he's paying in taxes and this and that. That's too much money. No, because you're probably going to make a amount of wage when you're doing that job, and you don't pay anything in taxes when you make poverty level. And guess what? If you got 4 kids, that's 4 tax credits that are coming back to you that you're not paying into. So I don't really agree with that argument. But a very strong look has to go into skilled labor and what it's going to those countries. Uh, Not because it's Trump, but because he's one of the first presidents to actually focus on honest jobs. And I don't mean like a failing solar panel company. I don't mean a failing battery company. I don't mean this, we're going to spend $6 trillion on this new technology that never happens. Barack Obama said famously, we got shovel ready jobs. No, you don't. You have a bunch of people that are engineering how to make a new shovel that'll never be able to be made, right? That's a scam, is what that is. So what I would like to see is while we're reinvesting into the American worker, into the skill trades, is let's incorporate that into immigration. You really want to be here? You really want to be an American? Okay, how can you read and comprehend English? How well are you good at that skilled trade? How much are you willing to learn that skilled trade? Even though I understand where Will's coming from, right? Like if you look at India, like, hey, we got a deficit of doctors right now. Well, let's go grab some doctors from India, and bada bing, bada boom. It looks like everybody's a win-win. Well, no, it's not. Especially the fact that I will tell you, as an electrician, I have met overseas Indians who are electrical engineers, and they can't even twist 2 wires together, right? Because to them, an engineer is nothing more than like a gopher in a union, right? They're not even a journeyman. They're just like not even an apprentice. So you put the title on the page saying that, hey, as a skilled electrician, but you get over there and realize this guy's an idiot. Like he has no idea what he's doing in this trade. So I think if we focus on those two, we can actually help out America get Americans, whether they're first generation or 80th generation, we can get them good paying jobs. We can bring our skill sets up into this nation, and we won't have to worry about companies going and saying, well, again, this goes to market and capitalism. I do this. I don't know if anybody else does. Whenever I go to buy a house, I look at the year and I look at the manufacturer that built the home or the builder that built the home. And I research it and I was like, are you hiring guys in the parking lot Home Depot? or are you hiring guys that have been doing this job for a while and know how to build houses? Because if I build a house that's made by somebody that's living in a Home Depot parking lot, I know every year I'm gonna have to change the windows out. I know every single year I gotta fix my roof. I know every single year I'm gonna have to fix some type of plumbing in my house, right? So yeah, it might be cheaper, but I'm paying a lot more money in the long run because I didn't have skilled labor do the job. So if we were to impress that upon the American populace and say, hey guys, I know we're pushing this whole made in America thing and made in USA thing, which is fantastic. Why don't we do a made by Americans thing? Right? I think that would probably help us out a lot, especially with our economy.
Yeah, and Will, that's probably why you ended up building your own house, right?
Not a straight angle on it, but damn it, I built it.
Yeah, yeah. And you're like, well, if something's wrong with it, I'll just blame myself, right?
I know exactly what's wrong with it. I'm the one who covered it up. Yeah, no, you know, you had mentioned earlier the crashing birth rates. And what instantly came to my mind was you're absolutely correct. They see the birth rates drop, so they want to import, right? I have a radical notion. I know this may catch people by surprise, but how about we incentivize Americans to have babies, right? How
Absolutely.
about
So, and
how
some,
about a tax credit
yep, some
for
countries are
being
doing that.
married?
Yep.
Yeah, a tax credit for being married, a tax credit per kid you have while you're married. After 10 years of marriage with 4 kids, no divorce, no taxes. If that's really what we want is birth rates up, then how about we make it easier for people to have kids? Most people want to have kids, I think, except for the people with septum rings and, enough ink on their face that looks like they got a retard got loose in a pen factory. Um, I think yeah, I think most people want to have kids. Um, so let's make it easier. And it's the same thing with the jobs market. You know, how about yes, Americans don't want to pick oranges for 50 cents an hour. Look, I don't want to do anything for 50 cents an hour. It's difficult to compete with basically free, right? And that's one of those things you look at, like Skinny, you're a big fan of the Civil War in that time frame. I look at, stories I see from the Civil War and the time that led up to it. Most Southern whites, for example, weren't big on hating me some blacks for the sake of hating me some blacks. That really wasn't what it was. What it was it's difficult to compete with free labor.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? You're a poor sharecropper. You can't get a job because guess what? All the jobs that should pay well don't pay anything because you got someone doing it for free. It's the same principle here. There are plenty of people who are impoverished who I'm sure would like to work on building houses, but it's difficult to compete with someone who's going to work under the table for 550 an hour because he lives in a house with 8 other people. You know?
Yeah.
Well, and I'm going to have to slightly correct you just a little bit because I am a Civil War nerd. So not to go crazy, but it actually wasn't Southern whites that were complaining about African Americans taking their jobs. That was actually the North.
Wouldn't shock me.
Yeah. So there was multiple uprisings that were conducted up north between African Americans and the Irish. And the reason why is
Mm,
because both were considered to be low-paying immigrants for doing those.
mhm.
Um, so there was a lot. There was just as much. I would say. I don't say there's more. There was just as much uh, racial tension in the north.
Oh yeah.
Down south, it was more because this is just the way that the system has been created. This is the way it's always been, and we just can't figure out another way to make it work because we're an agricultural society and culture. Up
Mhm.
north, it was much more of what we would kind of see as modern times now, which is you're not taking my job. I have to work my ass off as it is now to get pennies on the dollar. I don't need you taking more money from me, and now my family's starving even more. So
Mhm.
there's a different dynamic there, and you did bring up a good point, and I think that it needs to be pressed upon more. Is that what you're seeing up north at the time prior to the Civil War, up until 1858 or so? That's kind of what we're seeing now. And what's really interesting is that the federal government really had to get involved to straighten all that stuff out before it finally settled. Whereas now it seems like the federal government is, in the past, has kept its nose out of it and said, hey, society will correct itself. And I think we're now at kind of a tipping point where we're realizing that the society is not going to correct itself.
No, yeah, no, it's not. You know, the I think the entire thing, people get the misconception that they have a team in government, right? So like you remember the whole
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah, right? Like the Patriots, remember the Patriots, Tom Brady let the air out of the ball, right?
Yeah.
If you were in New England, Tom Brady did not let the air out of that ball. You guys are just a bunch of losers, right? If you're outside of New England, he definitely did it 100%. The truth is, they probably all do it all the time, right? It's like WWF, right? Macho Man and Hulk Hogan come out and they're going to rip each other's heads off, brother. And the crowd's screaming and hollering. And then they go back behind the velvet curtain and they're drinking brandy and smoking cigars, having a laugh.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So you've got the Republicans, you've got the uh, Department of Commerce Republicans, right? They're pro illegal immigration because they like the cheap labor. And you get the Democrats are pro illegal immigration because they like the easy votes. And the only people really getting it in the tailpipe is the average person trying to abide by the laws and do things the right way. And people are seeing uneven application of the law, just like you had alluded to with the the people you tried to deport, and they didn't want to deport
Yeah.
them. You know, I mean, I mean, not to go off on a tangent, it's getting late, but look at Hillary Clinton's secret illegal server hidden in the bathroom of her home. Okay. If you're on a submarine, Skinny, and you take a picture of your buddy who happens to be standing in front of, say, oh, I don't know, the screw on the back of the submarine, and that picture hits the public, yeah, you're going to prison.
Yeah.
This bitch had a secret illegal server in the bathroom of her home, and people just take sides. No, she didn't. Yes, she did. It's like, stop. It's like January 6th. You can burn down your own neighborhoods. You can burn down everything out there, but don't you dare come to the Crystal Cathedral where we sit on high and rule as lords and bring that noise here. It's like these people on the left who, scream and moan about it, and the people on the right who defend it understand they don't give a shit about you. None of them do at all. You are nothing more than a social security number. That's all you are. You are the the projected GDP that they use to take out loans in the names of your kids.
And Will, you make a great point, and it sort of ties back to the initial one of this conversation about the Marines being there. They're so concerned about the law when it comes to the Marines, but they're not
Mm.
concerned about the law with campaign finance reform. They're not concerned about the law when it comes to their politicians. They're not concerned.
They're
Oh,
not gonna,
oh, I don't want to see a Marine shoot a person who should never be here in the first place. I mean, and
yeah.
here's the one that just cracks me up is, well, technically speaking, crossing the border is just a civil offense, which is a misdemeanor. And I say this as someone who has a record, right? I say this as someone who cannot legally do certain things. To to me, it makes no difference whether it is a misdemeanor or a felony. If it is a crime, it is a crime. If someone steals, let's say your father or your grandfather, whoever, gave you a Timex timepiece, $25, $30 when he bought it, right? Has not gained value. It's a Timex green timepiece. I have a watch my dad gave to me that I have never given away. It doesn't work, will never work again. It is essentially worthless, but he gave it to me. It's like saying, well, the watch is only $30, so you shouldn't care that much, and we're not going to arrest this person who stole your property. To you, it is a crime. And to me, someone illegally crossing my border is worse than most misdemeanors, is worse than most felonies, because it's showing a blatant disregard for the laws of the country I was born and raised in, and my father and his father and his father, and possibly
Mm-hmm.
even the one before him, because even though I am Hispanic, we lived in the United States for like beginning of the 1900s, I think, right? And legally.
Well, and Yeah, a lot of Hispanics fought in the Mexican American War for the Americans.
Yeah. And
You know.
but just this idea that like I'm supposed to care about a bunch of people, as you guys have said, waving the flag of the foreign country, financed by the Soros type global billionaires,
Hmm.
foreign entities. As I would care if they got if they got Mozambiqued by a couple of 19-year-olds with a hard on. I would probably laugh and start eating popcorn regardless of what laws they are allowed to do. That's the Rick. That is the Rick who,
Hmm.
unlike you two fellas, didn't actually, have the displeasure or pleasure of going to combat. Um, I would love to see some guy who just got fresh out of SOI be able to get a couple confirmed kills just an hour from where he lives. I'm also insane.
Oh
I'm
God.
I'm sorry, Neil. I didn't catch that.
Oh, I said, were you in Fallujah? No, I was in Rodeo Drive.
I mean, call me crazy because I am, but like, you're not gonna have me cry a little tear because because some devil just violated a bunch of laws. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Born to kill, right?
Let's be honest. With all the different hatred that you're spouting, Rick, you're obviously a brown face for white supremacism. So I'm just gonna say, you might be going a little too far here, okay, of taking advantage of your cultural appropriation, right? Obviously, they are little sweet angels that never want to do anything. They're just rising up to let their voices to be heard. It's obviously mostly peaceful, so there's no reason to mostly go after them. Okay, it's like it's almost a joke, man. Like you want to laugh so hard. And I was talking to, I think I was talking to a buddy at work the other day, and he's a Democrat. I would say he's not a leftist. He is not a progressive. He is a Democrat. That's why I can talk to him like a human being. And I was like, hey man, like, I got to be honest. I really, really, really need you Democrats to stop making me Republican. And and he was like, I don't understand what you're talking about. And I was like, I explained everything. I was like, waving another country's flag, burning down, police cars, wrecking storefronts of businesses that this is their livelihood. It has nothing to do with politics, but they decide they want to take every TV for themselves, out the front window and all this stuff. And I'm like, you want me to have sympathy for, these poor people that are just trying to make a good living in their life, and starting over outside of their disgusting country, and that they're being hunted down like animals by the Marines and the National Guard. But I'm not seeing anywhere where the true empathy is supposed to lie, right? Like, what about the ICE agent that has a family, has more than likely a wife and kids at home, and his job, or her job, could be her, that his job is to go and take down these people that are trafficking humans? Where's the empathy there? Right? Like, I think Tom Holman is probably one of the best people that Trump could have picked to run, because he is very quick to show everybody the. Again, I keep going back to it, but I think that's the most argument that we have within this conversation is there's sympathy and there's empathy, and one can be used irrationally, and one can be used rationally, right? Sympathy could just be I'm sympathetic to everything, right? I'm sympathetic to every movement. I'm sympathetic to every human emotion, right? Whereas more like you can look at empathy. Empathy is like, man, I'm so sorry, but you know what? I've gone through a family death before myself. I have gone, I've lived on the streets homeless myself. I know how I can help you. I don't feel bad for you in the fact that I'm going to let you sleep in my living room and possibly try to sleep with my daughter, right? Or rape my daughter. I am actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that you have all the means necessary to get back on your feet again. That's a difference between the two. And I feel like one is yelling sympathy, the other one is yelling empathy, and the two are just not understanding how those two coincide like at all.
Mm-hmm. Will?
Um, Again, I go back to a lot of the people coming in are Christians. I'm a Christian. I sympathize with that. Um, but at the end of the day, you either have rules or you don't have rules. You either have laws or you don't have laws. If we want to live in a lawless society, I've got my assless chaps in my dirt bike, my little armed crossbow from Mad Max. I got someone going to ride on the back. I'm ready to go if we want to live that way. All right, I'll be a warlord. That's fine.
I'll be
Okay, if
custom
that's how.
tomahawk.
Hell yeah, oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we either have rules or we don't have rules. You know, I don't like the rules, and I think a lot of the rules are trivial, and I think a lot of the rules are dumb. But the rules are the rules, and if we don't like them, we should change them. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't blame these people for coming into the country. I don't. I would do this. Look, I would do the same fucking thing if I was down in Tijuana or wherever like that, and I seen the policies that the Biden administration was up here. I'd be hot footing it too. I would. I don't blame them. I blame the government.
100%. All right. We went a little bit over an hour. I am good with sort of ending it there. I think we largely agree, except unlike you guys who have actually seen a lot of violence in person, I I just watched it on TV. So so I'm like, yay, violence. And you guys are like, no. All right. So guys, I appreciate it. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. Thanks for watching, folks. Have a good
No,
one.